But we begin with China, as the People's Republic has now retaliated against Canada for the sanctions Ottawa imposed in response to China's poor treatment of Uyghurs. Today, Beijing announcing sanctions against individuals and entities in both Canada and the United States. And sanctions were also imposed on Conservative MP Michael Chong. Now, he is the Conservative Foreign Affairs critic. They were also slapped on the House of Commons Subcommittee on International Human Rights. On Thursday, Beijing issuing sanctions against several British MPs who have made comments about China's treatment of the Uyghur minority. Well, Conservative MP Michael Chong says he will wear the sanctions as a badge of honor. He joins us right now in Fergus, Ontario. Michael Chong, good to see you again. Thanks for being with us today.
Good to be here with you.
Listen, I want to begin here with your reaction. Now that you've been singled out, among others, for sanction by the People's Republic, what does that say to you about the current situation?
Well, what it tells me is that our criticism of China's genocide of its Uyghur Muslim minority is effective. I think the criticism of parliamentarians, both here and abroad, is effective. I think China is increasingly worried about mounting international criticism of its atrocious human rights record and is very worried. And I think that's the reason why they've responded with these sanctions.
Now, as we said, this is in response to Canada imposing sanctions on 4 Chinese officials with ties to the persecution of the Uyghur minority in the People's Republic. Sanctions that Beijing says were motivated by rumors and disinformation. How do you respond to that?
Well, I note that they haven't sanctioned government officials here in Canada. What they've done is they've sanctioned parliamentarians who've spoken up to criticize and to recognize that what is going on is a genocide. I won't be silenced. I won't be cowed into being silenced. I will continue to speak up. In fact, their sanctions just demonstrate how highly effective it is to criticize this government for these human rights violations and to continue to work multilaterally with parliamentarians around the world in highlighting this violation of international human rights.
I do wonder on a practical level, though, Michael, these sanctions that are being imposed by China, do they in any way impede your work as an MP or as the critic for foreign affairs?
Not at all. We live in a free and democratic society where we're free to express our opinions and to debate things freely. So it's not going to impact my ability to speak up on these issues. I believe strongly in these fundamental principles, these principles about human rights and liberty, these principles of democracy, these principles of the rule of law. And we have to defend these principles both here and abroad. The minute we become silent is the minute that we undermine these foundational principles. And so I don't think these sanctions are going to be effective. I think, in fact, they're going to do the opposite. They're going to rally democracies to come together to make it clear to China that these violations of international law are unacceptable and have to come to an end.
But, you know, these sanctions, as you know, they happen as the 2 Michaels were just tried last Monday, in Chinese courts. No verdicts, no sentences have yet been delivered. But do you worry that any criticism by entities, by individuals here, endangers the safety, maybe even the release of the 2 Michaels in China?
Well, that's what China would have us believe, that by being silent, that we will somehow better secure the release of Mr. Kovrig and Mr. Spaver. I disagree entirely. I think quite the opposite. I think by being passive and equivocating, by being silent in the face of these threats to our citizens, to our values, that we only further embolden China to continue with this kind of belligerent behavior. I think by speaking up and making it clear that detaining our citizens wrongfully, that threatening human rights and committing a genocide, that breaking international treaties and the violation of the 1984 Joint Declaration with respect to Hong Kong, I think by speaking up against these violations of human rights in international law, that we make it clear to China that it's not acceptable and that will be more effective in preventing future incidences like this.
Is it worthwhile for Canada to revisit whether or not this country or any individual in this country should be doing any trade with China in future?
Well, I think it's clear that certain aspects of our trading relationship need to be re-examined. We're calling on the government to take much stronger measures to put in place economic sanctions in respect to products that are being imported from China that have been produced using forced labor. There's widespread evidence that forced labor through the Uyghur Muslim minority is being used to produce cotton and tomatoes in Xinjiang province in Western China. We believe the government should introduce economic sanctions to ban the import of Chinese cotton and Chinese tomatoes because of that evidence. That's just one example of several that we think the government should do immediately in order to reinforce our stand on these human rights and to stop the continuation of these human rights violations in China.
You've even raised as a party the whole issue of the Asia Infrastructure Bank.
That's right. Canada recently transferred another $40 million to the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is a China-led initiative to expand its model of governance and influence throughout the Indo-Pacific region. We believe in the context of current events that the government should suspend those payments and should withdraw out of that investment bank because it is not a benevolent influence in the region. That's another action the government should be taking in order to counter these threats that China is presenting to the rules-based international order.
Michael Chong, thank you for responding to our request to be on the program so quickly today. Appreciate the time.
Thank you for having me.
And that is MP and Conservative Party critic for Foreign Affairs, Michael Chong.